Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today I'm super excited to have Ondina Bennaïm. Ondina, welcome to the show.
Elena, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
So this is one of my favorite topics, all about visibility and exposure. And I think it's a really, really important topic. So thanks for coming in to talk about this. Ondina, for those who don't know who you are, can you say a couple of words about who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So currently I work as a senior director of regulatory affairs for Becton Dickinson for about a year. And previously I spent my careers primarily in medtech organizations, both in regulatory and quality. And I'm equally excited about the topic today because I think visibility and exposure are two very, very important career success key requirements for everyone aspiring to grow their career in the medtech space, but not only.
So visibility and exposure, let's just nail down specifically what we mean when we talk about that. So for you, because when I approached you about this and I said, hey, what are you passionate about? What do you think is important that we need to be, sharing the message on? This was something that you came up with, right? So can you help me understand what really do you mean when you talk about visibility and exposure?
Sure. So when I'm thinking about visibility and exposure, I'm thinking about being known to the organization, being known as an individual in the organization, and making your department known in the organization. Because typically in the regulatory affairs space, we tend to do as much as possible in terms of hard work and incorporate, significant Herculean efforts to get things done. But this sometimes makes people not necessarily realize what regulatory affairs professionals do, or not, expose the RA individuals to the rest of the organization. So when I'm thinking about, visibility, what I'm thinking about is, somebody looking for, volunteers to support a project or initiative. And the first name that comes out is your name. That's what I'm referring to when I'm referring to visibility.
Okay, so that's almost sort of like brand awareness or like building your brand almost within the company, right? Why is it important? Like what's the benefit of it?
Well, I think visibility is important for career progression, for making yourself known in the organization, but also for getting things done in your day-to-day job. For me, that's the key area where I think, being visible is absolutely important. Getting things done, from my point of view, means somebody you know where to get to, who to connect with in order to advance and progress on the things you are responsible for.
I think as well, what I've seen is that, sometimes people, the people who get that next promotion or get that leadership role is not necessarily the person who is the one doing all the detailed work, but it's the one who's the best at being able to articulate the value that they're able to add, especially in positions, in those regulatory and quality positions that are very much linked to commercial and to the sales side of the business. And so, it's not enough to just be the one, from what I've seen, it's not enough to just be the one sort of like sitting behind the scenes doing the work. You actually need to be able to communicate the value that you're adding and how you can actually go about partnering and helping. And sometimes, people say to me, Eleanor, I'm the hardest working person in my team, but I don't get seen for the promotion. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Oh, absolutely. And what I like to respond to that is hard work is not enough. Hard work is probably the non-negotiable. When you enter the workforce, especially in the competitive landscapes we are dealing with today, hard work is a given. Everybody's working extremely hard. And in the medtech space, because our purpose is so noble, we do tend to be extremely hardworking, extremely dedicated individuals. What really makes it or breaks it in terms of career promotion, from my point of view, is really this visibility. Being a name that is mentioned when you are not in a meeting, as somebody that is capable, as somebody that can get things done. And as somebody that is hardworking and producing results. So I think really the combination of hard work and visibility is actually the key for career promotion and career success. And, you can achieve this through many, many different ways. One way I, remember starting to become more visible in the organization at the time where I was still quite middle management level and I didn't have access to all top executives, was by being part of employee resource groups. They exist in, most major organizations. And being part of an employee resource group, which happened to be on a diversity and inclusion subject that I'm very passionate of, allowed me to connect and interact with, top executives of the organization. And by doing that, I managed to understand the level of conversations that are taking place at, higher level. And I just managed to get my name through. And I ended up for a key acquisition to actually have my name put forward in terms of regulatory support for due diligence, just because the person in the employee resource group happened to connect with me. So as you see, the visibility aspect is sometimes even as important as hard work in order to advance your career, get exposed to interesting projects, programs, and initiatives outside of your, let's say, typical routine job, and also getting things done in your day-to-day deliverables.
Okay, cool. So we've established what it is. We've spoken about why it's important. Especially if you're somebody who wants to progress in your career, right? So maybe if you're quite happy where you are and you don't want to be visible, but if you want to get that next promotion, if you want to progress in your career and advance, we've said visibility and exposure is something that's really, really important. What would you say, Ondina, then are sort of like, give me 3 things that somebody could do right now in order to make themselves more visible within their organization?
Sure. And before I answer your question, I just want to make a little parenthesis. I think even if you are happy in your career and you don't want to progress, you still want to be out there. You still want to be out there and make the connections because, we've seen the only constant nowadays in our world is change. You still want to evolve in your career and maybe in terms of knowledge, not necessarily in terms of promotion. So making yourself known and visible to the organization, as well as your needs in terms of development known, I think it's important. So even if you don't have, career aspirations, I would still recommend that you take in the visibility advice and topic seriously and start looking at what are the opportunities to increase your visibility in your organization. Now, the top 3 very practical, I would say, actions somebody that wants to be visible can take. The first one, just speak up in meetings. I think it's the simplest. It's an opportunity that we all have multiple times on a daily basis. Just speak up, raise your voice, share your opinion, bring your perspective. You might be feeling that you don't have anything to add to the conversation because everything has been said, or because people have already articulated the message you want to transmit much better. Do it anyway. Even sometimes with the risk of repeating yourself, my recommendation is just speak up. You are going to be flexing a muscle that you will need more and more as you advance your career, and speaking up is absolutely important. The other thing, just make connections outside of your typical day-to-day job. If you interact with your R&D department colleagues only when you are working on a project, my challenge to everyone would be, invite that person for a coffee. Be curious to learn more about the organization. Interact with departments you have nothing to do with, from, I don't know, procurement to finance. Build that business acumen. And as you do that, make sure that you do it by connecting with people. That would be another way of being visible. And the third way of being visible inside an organization is express yourself and express what you want to do and where you want to get from a career perspective. That can be to your manager, that can be to your human resources business partner. I had a vested interest in healthcare economics, for example, and I know that regulatory and healthcare economics sometimes go hand in hand because the reimbursement aspects sometimes consider innovative regulatory pathways. I shared that information with everybody that was interested in listening to my passion. I had numerous meetings with colleagues in government affairs that would be dealing with reimbursement. I read everything possible under the moon and the star. And whenever a project associated with reimbursement came up, I was the first name on the list that got chosen, just because I was very talkative around my interest and passion for what I want to do. And then the fourth point, the bonus point, is be visible on, social networks. I think, Elena, your group on LinkedIn offers a great opportunity for everybody to be visible and to practice, let's say, in a safe environment, expressing opinions, perspectives, and regulatory expertise. So those would be my, let's say, practical tips for visibility.
So one of the ones that you've mentioned quite a few times is building connection, right? And I think that's a really important piece, because business ultimately, a company is made up of people, right? Otherwise, so it's really important to build those human relationships. You gave the advice of, just like invite someone for a coffee, and talk to people that are not in your areas of the day-to-day work that you do. But in a world, my question for you, in a world where everybody's super busy, everybody's slammed for time, people are, prioritizing many different things at, all at the same time, really, how can you get someone who you're not actually working with right now to go for a coffee with you? Like, how do you actually sell that? How do you ask for that from someone?
I mean, for me, I'm very direct as an individual, and I just approach the person directly. In most cases, they are not available right away, but my experience, especially with colleagues in the organizations where talent development is important, I think people do find time for a 15 minutes break just to, say hello. If that doesn't work, and maybe sometimes it really doesn't work, and you don't have that 15 minutes available on somebody's calendar, try to be part of one of their meetings, of one of their staff meetings. So you maybe start by having an indirect connection or a more informal connection with that person. You hear a little bit of the vocabulary of what is discussed at that meeting. And then you reach out, providing some help. Hey, I heard of your last meeting, you were discussing about a challenge around interoperability. I don't know, from a regulatory perspective, I wanted to let you know these are some key considerations. So sometimes it might be just, that. If you don't have an opportunity to connect with somebody directly, or again, as I said earlier, try to see if the person you are trying to make a connection with is part of a different group than your typical tribe. It might be an employee resource group that you are also passionate about. For me, again, being part of a women's network at work helped me tremendously connect with individuals outside of my business unit, outside of my team. So there are some different ways outside of the direct approach that one can consider when thinking about how do I get to know somebody.
And if it is just about, wanting to connect with somebody and go for a coffee, like, how do you ask for that? Like, literally, what do you say to somebody?
Oh, my typical is, hey, I'm very interested in building business acumen on I don't know, R&D or your area of expertise, do you have 15 minutes for me to share your wisdom or share your knowledge? And once you say that, I mean, very rarely I happen to have people saying a blunt no to such a direct invitation. Maybe I didn't get on their calendar right away, but generally people are interested in sharing information and knowledge, especially if that helps them out as well. Because typically in these kind of conversations, you start by being curious about what other person is doing, but also be prepared yourself in the conversation to connect the dots and interrupt that, let's say, monologue of here is what I'm doing for a living with, oh, here is how what I'm doing for a living may actually be connected to the things that you are responsible for. So, just make it a win-win, and make sure that you allow as well a little bit of time for yourself to transmit some knowledge and information, so the other person also takes something out of the conversation.
I think that's really really valuable advice. To actually put yourself forward and as a problem solver, right? And the more you can get them talking about their role and some of the challenges they might face in their role, if there's any way that what you do could help them, or even if you give them one bit of information that they go, actually, that's really helpful, thank you, that moment of sort of like the light bulb connection moment.
Sure.
That's what you're trying to drive through having these conversations, right? It's showing how you can help people. The more you can help people and be a connector, the more you will get mentioned when you're not in the room. Question that I have for you, Ondina. So is it important to be intentional with the people that you're trying to build connection with? So what I mean by that is identify, okay, these are my top 5 people that I want to build connection with, in the next whatever period of time, and go after them? Or is it more just to try to build as many connections as you can, irrespective of sort of like who they are and where they sit within the company?
I would say it's a mix. I'm maybe 40% intentional and 60% going with the flow, because I did learn through experience that sometimes you get more out of a conversation with somebody you are not very intentional about than with somebody that you are extremely intentional about. So I would say just come to any conversation with an open mind. That would be my idea. And of course, I'm talking about visibility and how important it is to be visible. It doesn't mean you have to be desperate and with no matter any connection, you go and try to put yourself out there and be visible, right? I think, just go with the flow, and share what you do. Some of us might be maybe shy of entering conversations with, people that we don't know. For this, my only advice is just get comfortable being uncomfortable. The worst thing that can happen when you reach out to somebody is to get a no. And we have all lived and survived rejections. So I'm pretty confident that, just open up for the conversations. In terms of intentionality, try to think about what could be some key functions as opposed to key people, because sometimes maybe the exact name you are seeking to interact with is not available, but somebody else in a similar role might be. So try to think of, key functions or key areas of responsibility of somebody that you would like to interact with from an intentionality perspective. But again, also let yourself loose and taken by the wave of potential opportunities for connection without being intentional.
So let's address the female point here.
Sure.
I don't know how you feel about this. This is always a bit of a mixed bag when we talk about it. But question that I have for you is it more important for women to be visible because we're women? Have you ever experienced times where you've felt you've had to push harder than men because of your gender? What are your thoughts generally on the gender question when it comes to visibility?
I mean, there are a lot of stereotypes, right? If you are too outspoken as a woman, you can be considered maybe too visible, too aggressive. I mean,
Aggressive, yeah.
I do remember somebody, I was much earlier in my career and somebody told me that I come across as a cowboy in meetings, simply because I was just very, very outspoken. But I would say do it anyway. And I do think it's important to speak up with authenticity, focus on facts. And I do think that maybe for women, just to, address the gender stereotype here, it's more important to speak up because generally when we do speak up, we want to be sure of what we are saying. Whereas we've all been part of conversations where, other gender counterparts are just sharing opinions. So for me, I say this is where I'm very intentional. Speaking up in my case is an act of intention. I speak up, and I do come to meetings with the intentions of speaking up. Sometimes it might be reinforcing somebody's opinion, not necessarily putting through mine if I feel I'm not having the right level of expertise. But I do come to meetings with the intention of speaking up. So I do think it's more important for women to speak up because typically we are more risk averse. Typically we want to have the right answer. And my experience is that this can be turning into intentional invisibility instead of intentional visibility. So yeah, I suggest to everybody to speak up, but I think for women, it has to be a more mindful act.
So let's talk about your own journey, because you've given loads and loads and loads of advice here, which is hopefully going to really help people build connection and be more visible within their organizations and outside of their organizations. But I'd love to understand your journey and your story. So at what point did you sort of wake up and realize I need to be more visible? This is something that's really important for me to be successful in my career.
Oh, I think for me, it was quite early in my career and I was working very hard. And my problem wasn't necessarily that I didn't get promoted because at that time in my career, I wanted to learn as much as possible. So I was absorbing as much information as possible. But I was suffering because I was missed from key meetings. And then regulatory submissions typically became at those times an aftermath of all the discussions from new product development to line extension to what have you. So for me, I realized I need to get myself part of those meetings and I need to make myself visible at the table. So people are more mindful when they are thinking of who's attending a meeting or not. And that's kind of how everything took off for me. Paired with that, I stumbled upon a book. I don't know if I should recommend it right now because it's quite gender biased, but it's called Never Eat Alone. And while it's an advice on, how to become a millionaire by interacting with millionaires, the key takeaway message of that book was just get to know as many people as possible. So this is what I did. I was, taking the time to not eat lunch in front of my computer, but actually, get to meet with people, not take a coffee and have it at my desk, but actually call somebody or just, knock on somebody's door and invite them for a little coffee. So I did start to make those connections on a more direct, mindful, intentional way. From that path onward, I was blessed enough having mentors that helped me identify additional ideas to get more connections, to get more visible, putting my hands up for projects, and again, being part of employee resource groups just to interact with groups that I'm typically not acquainted with on a day-to-day basis. Those would be, I would say the things that I started doing, but of course, as with everything else, my journey into visibility came out of a lot of frustration for not being invited to be at the table.
So in terms of your journey, have you got an example of a time where Like you were actually able to move the needle forwards on something because you were able to be in that meeting and be visible.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. It was it was a key acquisition that the company was looking to make, and as the rest of the team at the table was talking about the integration activities and how much that's going to take from a timeline perspective and how we're going to be integrating all the IT systems and everything, I actually realized the company that we were supposed to buy at that time didn't have any of their products CE marked, therefore cleared for Europe. So I did speak up in that exact moment. The company I worked for ended up still acquiring that organization, but reducing the acquisition price significantly and building in and planning additional contingency to get those products regulatory cleared for Europe. So would I have not spoken up? I would have done a disservice to the organization. And I think by speaking up in that key moment, even though I thought, oh, it's impossible that the due diligence team didn't observe that, I still made the comment. I still decided, no, I really have to say that because otherwise I won't be able to live with myself. And I think from that point onwards, there was no meeting regulatory was missed from. So I do think that moved the needle significantly. And again, it was once again proof of just getting over yourself and speak up. Sometimes it might be just repeating something that somebody already did or said, but just do it anyway. It's a good sanity check.
Have you ever experienced any downsides of being visible?
Honestly, I don't know if I would. Yeah, reflecting on any downsides, I would say no. As I mentioned before, I was given the feedback that I come across as a cowboy in meetings, but I also thought it was my responsibility when I heard that feedback to decide whether I want to take it or not. And for my own persona, for my own interest in coming across as authentic as possible at work, I decided for me, visibility is something very important. It's aligned with my key values, with how I want to come across as authentic. So I just, moved on, carried on being one of the outspoken voices in the room. So I would say in general, from this point of view, personally, I haven't experienced any downside. If I am thinking, though, at colleagues that maybe do not speak that much in the workplace, in meetings, sometimes I am self-reflecting and considering that I'm maybe shadowing some of those conversations and some of those individuals that would be maybe interested or would want to voice their opinion, but they are more concerned. And it's something that I noticed more recently, and I am making, again, a mindful effort of inviting others in the room to express their opinions, making sure that even people that are not generally comfortable speaking up are at least given an opportunity to voice their opinions. But those would be, I would say, if any downside, it's not something that impacted me personally, but I am mindful that it could be shadowing somebody that, is in a meeting and thinks if I'm not as outspoken, I should not speak up at all.
I think you also touch on another sort of piece of advice on how to be more visible, which is if you're somebody that wants to be more visible, actually aligning yourself with the more visible person in the room. And even just like giving them a heads up that, you'd like to add something to you'd like to contribute something to the conversation before you go into the meeting, or, like saying, hey, I'm making this conscious effort to try to, speak up more in meetings. If the person that is visible knows that actually you've got, an ambition to want to develop that area of yourself, they're much more likely to also bring you into the conversation, right? Hey, what do you think? And that sometimes makes it a lot easier to actually speak up if you're sort of invited for your thoughts in the conversation. And also, if you are one of the more visible, outspoken personality types in the room, it's worth paying attention to maybe who the other people are, that could provide valuable insight to the conversation, and actually invite them. That's another way to build connection, right? Invite them to share their thoughts and ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, it's great to have an ally in the room that can pick you up and, invite you to the conversation calmly. That is the best case scenario. Now I wanna highlight that not every meeting will be a best case scenario where we are gonna have allies in those meetings. Hence, it's important to make the connections before the meetings. So the more connections you have, the more potential allies you have in a meeting. If the best case scenario doesn't happen, just mindful action, speaking up once per meeting would be my challenge to everybody in that is listening.
So what are your thoughts on sort of like the difference between talking about your successes and bragging? Because sometimes in conversations that I have about, helping people be more visible, there's sometimes the hesitation that, hey, I'm not a sales guy. Talking about my successes or talking about the value that I add is basically me selling, and I don't want to be that sales pushy person, and it's bragging if I'm talking about my successes. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we all have something to sell, right? And we are selling our skills every single day, right? That's what we do. I don't see being visible and being outspoken as bragging, especially when we're talking about somebody's successes. I think, making it about the value you add and the value that was added to the organization, sticking to the facts, talking about what was achieved, but having that message delivered by you, from you, with the right tone, with the right intention, would not be perceived as bragging. I think it is important from a personal branding perspective to also be mindful of who we are. And of course, we don't want to come across, or I don't want to come across as too pushy or overselling. At the same time, I do want to come across as confident in the value I can add to an organization. And that value is the expertise that I bring at the table, the perspectives that I bring at the table every time I'm speaking up. So I would challenge everybody that thinks, I don't want to be seen as bragging, to focus the narrative in their own head conversation from I'm bragging into the expertise they bring at the table. So make it more about the knowledge they put on the table as opposed to how they come across themselves.
Yeah, and the advice that I give, especially in particular, we do, interview coaching right before candidates are going into interviews. And this is a constant, frequent conversation. Talk to me about your biggest success. Keep it results focused, right? So like the more fact-based that your successes are, and here we're talking about, are you able to link something you did to open in a market that equaled revenue for the company, or saved costs for the company, or increased efficiencies, so really thinking about sort of like tying it down to the numbers and making it like fact-based. So you're not saying, hey, I'm an amazing person, right? Because that's subjective. That's your opinion of yourself. But if you're able to say, hey, I worked on this project, and through using this strategy, I was able to deliver X for the company, and X being indirectly often in regulatory and quality, but tied to revenue, tied to market share. Those things are quite hard to be contested, because we're talking then about facts and results. And that makes it less bragging feeling, because actually you're talking about real outcomes versus your opinion of your outcomes, if you see what I mean. That's normally
Absolutely. Facts-oriented, results-oriented conversations. For people managers, I also like when I interview people and talk to me about their talent retention quota in an organization. In our super uber competitive landscape, managing to keep employees motivated and engaged and happy at the workplace is also, I would say, an important result and metric that I like people managers to talk about when they speak about their successes.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one as well, because, something like management, sometimes can feel quite intangible, right? And it's very soft skill leadership type focused, but actually there are some real important metrics like retention, like successes of your team, what actual results of your team been able to deliver, like your score as a leader from your team. There are metrics that you can use to show that, yeah, you are a good leader. That isn't just you saying you're a great leader. so that, thanks for that. That's a really good point. You've spoken a lot, Ondina, about like some of the do's, right? Do speak up, do build connection. Are there any don'ts? Are there any things that you should not absolutely move away from doing, stop doing right now, because that is absolutely going to kill your visibility within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, as I've been saying, speak up, speak up, speak up. I would also say don't speak up if you don't know what you are talking about. So I would say do speak up prepared, don't speak up unprepared. I think that's very, very important. I think that kills not your visibility, but it does kill, your brand. If you come across as somebody that just wakes up in a meeting speaking up without anything to add to the conversation. So don't speak up, without thinking. I would say that is the most important. Don't show up, in meetings and talk just for the sake of talking.
Is there anything else?
I don't know if I can think of anything else in terms of don't do from a visibility perspective. Maybe don't speak up over others. I think, some of the basics, just be respectful of everybody's opinion, and don't turn the conversation off by how you come across.
So you also mentioned, so we've spoken a lot about internal visibility and building connection and building relationships internally within a company. But you also spoke about building your brand externally. So what advice do you have for people who maybe want to start to build more of a brand as an expert or as a leader, thought leadership type of activities? What advice do you have for them?
I mean, LinkedIn, your group, active engagement and participation. I think you challenge all of us every day with the questions that come through from anonymous members, and that's where everybody has an opportunity to contribute and connect within the network. That would be a good starting point. Of course, any other forums in the physical world as well, opportunity to attend industry association meetings, apply for speaking gigs from in those kind of forums are other ways of building visibility and a network outside your own organization.
So how important is it? So the advice that you've given when it comes to something like LinkedIn, for example, is, interact more in the group. And for those of you who aren't in the group, if you look on LinkedIn, EU MDR IVDR update forum, it's a long title, but it does exactly what it says on the tin. And we've got nearly 10,000 people in this group now. Yeah. And everybody has to be approved before they join, but everybody is within the space. The topic of conversation is often about the new regulations, but all the different technical aspects. And it's a place where people are asking questions to each other, either directly by posting it in the group, or they can ask via an anonymous link, so their name isn't directly linked to asking the question. You didn't specifically say, Ondina, write blogs and articles and post videos of yourself. You were talking more about like interacting within the group. So is there a way to build your brand without actually going full on LinkedIn content creator? And is there a way to build your brand just by interacting, within a group?
I mean, I think so. I think, interacting just within a group gives you a starting point to build a portfolio. It gives people an opportunity to measure your technical expertise, especially without having seen your CV, without having necessarily an interview or a face-to-face or a virtual interaction. So I think that is a starting point. I would always think about names of people that post, answers and share their expertise, as somebody that is passionate about the industry, is interested in collaborating, is interested in contributing. Therefore, for me, outside of the technical expertise, it gives me a good insight into their soft skills and how they would come across, being part of a team in a conversation. So I think, that can certainly help you out as a starting point in getting your expertise and your brand known and more visible to the outside world.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, because I think sometimes people think that, hey, for me to become visible, I need to now build this massive LinkedIn following, and I have to post every single day, and I have to write blog articles and publish them. And actually, there's a midway step before you get to that place, which is more about just being intentional in terms of what you do. But you can add loads of value just by like commenting on somebody else's post, or just sharing somebody else's post that you found insightful with your own thoughts and ideas. You don't actually have to go out there and completely create your own fully original content. You have a day job, right? So like that there's
Absolutely.
people that do that just for their day job. So, but actually, if you're in the group, if we use a group as an example, and you see an anonymous question come in, and it's an area where you actually do have experience, just share your ideas and experience underneath. By doing that, potentially 10,000 people could see it, and all of a sudden like start to associate your name. And the more regularly you do it, and the more insightful your comments are, and the more valuable they are for people, the more you start to build your brand as sort of like the expert for that thing within the niche.
Absolutely. I mean, again, from my point of view, it's another way of flexing the muscle of speaking up. You are just speaking up in a different type of forum, but you are speaking up. And maybe, for some that are more reluctant on speaking up in a face-to-face interaction or virtual on-camera interaction, speaking up in writing is the first area of comfort from which they can build, and again, continue to flex that muscle of making yourself visible. And absolutely, you don't want to start from, ideally, you would start your entire life with blogs and content and posting videos every day, but we all have day jobs. So instead of trying to conquer the world and going from A to Z, start from going from A to B by just, sharing something every day or posting an opinion every day, and build from there. Again, the more that muscle gets used to being out there, the easier it's becoming.
So thanks very much, Ondina, for sharing like so many useful and practical, insightful tips on how to become more visible. Question that I have for you, slightly different topic. So where do you go to get your inspiration?
My inspiration typically comes from art, and I love all kind of art. I'm passionate about floral design myself, so my inspiration comes from art. I think it's important that we bring creativity in problem solving, and I do like to think outside the box. I like to think outside the box, and I'm constantly challenging the status quo. And the other person I'm getting inspiration from when I'm now looking at art and artists is my husband, who's a very, very pragmatic individual, has a ton of knowledge of everything. And sometimes his perspective about the subject that has nothing to do with the problem I'm dealing with helps me unclutter and resolve the issue I'm struggling with.
That's such a sweet thing to say. I'm sure he's going to listen to this and give you 10 out of 10 points for giving him a mention.
I hope so.
Extra brownie points for you. Ondina, the big question that I love to ask everybody at the end of the show is, what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
My legacy, I just want to be able to inspire anybody, one single person, to be the best version of themselves. That is what I'm aspiring to.
Thank you very much, Ondina. That's well, I'm hoping that through this really insightful and interesting conversation that we've had today, all on visibility and exposure, you've been able to inspire some people to go out there and speak up. So guys who are listening, if you've got value from this, please take action. And as Ondina said, speak up. Take one small step every single day to becoming visible. Don't expect to go from, as she said, A to Z overnight, but really go from A to B and B to C as you move forward. Let us know that you found value in this episode by liking, sharing, commenting. Leave us a review and connect with Ondina on LinkedIn. And if you're not in my MDR IVDR group, little plug that you should be joining that. And Ondina, thank you so much for coming on this show. It's been super interesting speaking with you today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Anna. It was great.
Thank you and goodbye.